Howdy. Um, Now that we are at the end of the first discussion, and I'm going to be grading them, we need to obviously have a chat about this thing called citation. How and when you cite, and by that what I mean is internal citation. Now I know for a lot of you this is one of your first courses, so you haven't gotten a lot of exposure to citation yet, which is why for the first discussion I will give you a very low citation grade because I did try to post in the first announcements that citation is mandatory, the how and when to cite document. I will be sending that and this to you if you did not cite in your top post or in your peer comments. But in order to get us there, let's talk about what exactly citation means and what these words that I'm going to use, like internal citation and works cited, what they actually mean. So I've done another document for you other than how and when to cite. This is in response to a certain extent to the first discussion post itself about Greek and Roman women. So instead, though, of me actually addressing the topic of that discussion, since I think most of you understand what you're supposed to be doing with it, talking about either Greek or Roman women in your top post, and then in your peer comments, talking about the women you didn't choose for the top post. That way you get to actually talk about both of them. I want to talk instead about this thing we do in history called historiography. Historiography is the way we tell the story of history. If you want to get into a real definitional structure for it, it is the history of history, or the history of how history is written, and how history and the interpretation of it changes, usually from generation to generation. So that's what the first part of this paragraph is about. And it's based, part of the reason it changes is because of the new things that we find. Historians work principally with what are called primary sources. I'm going to talk about that as we go through this as well. Historians write, as a rule, secondary sources. Secondary sources are attempts to explain the past based on the use of primary sources. Primary sources are documents that are written in the past by someone living then. All right, so your textbook is traditionally known as a tertiary source, even though sometimes they're also called secondary sources. A tertiary source, textbooks, encyclopedias, dictionaries, places where lots and lots of knowledge have been combined into one place, usually for the purposes of teaching or reference. These are broad sources that we tend to use if we want to get a general idea about something that happened in the past or something in general. You will notice that I have gone to an actual source itself, Yale University, and everywhere in here that I have discussed something that it says, such as the definition of tertiary sources, I have cited it. This right here, this parenthetical, because it has a parenthesis on each end of it, this parenthetical insertion is called an internal citation. And those go at the end of every sentence where you use information from a source, even if you put it in your own words. In this case, I have rephrased what Yale University says about tertiary sources. I have put it in my own words, but I still have to cite it because I got the information from this website. The internal citation is literally the author and the date, and if you're using a book, the page number. I'll show you an example of that towards the end. And it should match right here, this author or these whatever you have here first identifies. It should be the first thing in the citation in the work cited. Right here, see? Yale University, primary sources at Yale, 2025, as in they update this regularly, so they keep it, the copyright date for it is the current year, and then the location itself, and this is what would be in your works cited. The work cited is the full citation for the source. The internal citation is only, again, the author, the date, and if you're using a book, the page number. All right, so this first part here is talking about the different types of sourcing, again, tertiary, secondary here, primary. Again, through all of this, I have included citation where necessary when I am talking about or paraphrasing what they say. Now, right here, I actually have a direct quote from Yale University. Analyze, interpret, and evaluate primary sources. Secondary sources typically reference or summarize primary sources and other secondary sources. Examples of sources include scholarly works, textbooks, journal articles, histories, and biographies. Now notice, this information is in quotation marks because it is a quote. I directly took the words from the Yale University website and put them here. My citation for it is not at the end because I cite it right here just before it. I actually give you that same thing, and because I'm referring directly to it, I don't have to put the university itself, Yale University, in the parentheses. I do have to put the date, though. So this is the equivalent of a citation for that. You can also put Yale University 2025 in the parentheses here, but you don't have to because it's already cited here. But you must have that citation. All right. So going on with this, I'm not going to read this to you because, of course, we don't want to do that. I will send it to you, as I said. I talk about historiography and how it changes. And in this, Slotkin, your textbook, has a very, very good demonstration of what we refer to as historiography on page 22. Now, notice here, I have Slotkin, 2019, page 22, because it is a book. So therefore, I have to include the page number, especially for where this quote came from. While men were occupied with running the Athenian democracy and waging almost continual warfare, upper-class women rarely left their homes. Historically, scholars created a picture of a society of extreme gender separation. However, more recently, this picture of strict segregation has been challenged. Paul Crystal notes, in reality, there is precious little evidence to support the supposed virtual segregation. Okay, this is historiography right here. This gentleman, Mr. Crystal, is arguing that no, actually, we don't have any direct evidence of that, so we don't know if this is what happened. We believe, because it seems to be this case, and we have believed it for a very long time, but we have very little actual primary source material, information literally from the society itself to support that. All right, so Crystal's assessment contradicts what historians have been arguing for a very long time, and what Slotkin also argues. Many of you in your discussion basically stated that the Athenians were very, very segregated in terms of gender roles. But again, we don't seem to have a lot of proof of that. So this may or may not be an accurate interpretation. Because it has been believed for so long to be this way, and because we don't have any evidence to the contrary either, we're going to continue to work with that as the main operating theory. But I want to point out that this is literally what historiography is. It's the idea of taking the same information, or in this case, lack of information, and interpreting it a different way based on newer information or new ideas. Slotkin also gives us some other examples of historiography. In this quote, this very long quote, from pages 29 and 30, which traces the information that we have about female Greek painters. We don't actually have any information about female Greek painters from ancient Greece itself. The very first information we have comes from Pliny the Elder, who was writing in the 1st century CE, several hundred years after ancient Greece itself had been taken over by Alexander the Great and united under the control of kings. So Pliny, in the 1st century, recorded a handful of names. Then, during the Renaissance, when there was what is referred to as the rebirth of learning, or actually the rediscovery of a lot of these ancient Greek and Roman texts, Boccaccio read Pliny's work and incorporated it into his book concerning famous women. And this was written effectively in the 11 and 1200s. So this is almost 1,000 years after Pliny. Several hundred years later, Christine de Pizan, in her book, Book of the City of Ladies, took Boccaccio's writing and incorporated it there. So what we've got is a reiteration of information from Pliny through Boccaccio to Pizan and into the present, based on an idea put forth by a man who was writing hundreds of years after the civilization itself had ended. So we only have the mention of these female Greek painters from Pliny. We don't actually have it from the time period itself. So this means that it could or could not be accurate. The Roman historians were not known for citing their works, hence the reason we put such a big emphasis on it today. So we don't actually know where he got his information. All right, so this again is this concept of historiography, the way the story of history changes from generation to generation, time period to time period. And it is part of why it is so very important that we have this citation in there. So once again, I'm going to sum up here at the end of this with the 3 instances where you know you must at this point internally cite. You must always internally cite or put that parenthetical insertion at the end of every quote, and quotes must always be in quotation marks, because this says to the reader that not only did you get this idea from the other source, but you're using that source's exact words to define that idea or that information. You also, though, must cite when you use information from a source, even if you put it in your own words. This kind of mixes with the third time, which is when something is not common knowledge. It's a little bit trickier when something's not common knowledge. I've got a couple of examples at the end of this when you must cite, and I took these from U.S. history since most of us are pretty familiar. Most of us wouldn't need to cite the year 1776 because in the U.S., it's pretty much beaten into us from the time we're in, the first or second grade, that 1776 was the year of the start of the Revolution, when the colonies decided that they no longer wanted to be part of the British Empire. They wanted to be independent. Most of us know that that is when the Declaration of Independence was signed. What most of us don't know, though, is the significance of the year 1783, which in U.S. history was the year that the Treaty of Paris was signed, which effectively recognized the independence of the colonies and the creation of them as an independent nation. Most of us know that George Washington was the first president, but most of us do not know that Henry Knox was the first Secretary of War and that he was tasked with dealing with the Indian problem, as it were. And in fact, for almost all of U.S. history up until the 1930s or 40s, maybe the 30s, administration of Indian reservations and anything having to do with Native Americans was done through the military. It's not until literally the Great Depression that I think it's the 1930s, that the Bureau of Indian Affairs was removed from the Department of War or from the military and put into, actually made into a department of its own standing. So this is, again, stuff that is not common knowledge. I actually know this stuff because I teach U.S. history and because I have a big focus on most of my research currently is in indigenous history in the United States. But because this is not common knowledge to you, I had to go get my trusty textbook out and find the information so I could cite it. Because even though I know it, I know that you don't. So that's kind of what common knowledge is. One of the best tests for whether you need to cite something or not. If you turn around and you say to your roommate or your significant other or someone in the house with you, if you ask them a question about a piece of information and they don't know it, then it's not usually considered common knowledge and therefore it must be cited. All right, so I have multiple examples through here of when you must cite, obviously, and how you must cite. And down here, I have a works cited. Now, your works cited must, at this point, be in everything you do as well. And most of you did do the works cited, even if you didn't do the internal citation. But the works cited matches to the internal citation as well. That's why it's called a works cited, because you used these works and information from them in the body of your document, right? Sorry, I just realized that I didn't have this italicized. Book titles are always italicized, by the way, just in case you're curious. If you copy and stop it. If you copy and paste from the course guide and from Slotkin itself, you will have to actually go back and italicize. I had to do that with several of the things in there. There we go. Articles are, as a rule, titles of articles are in quotation marks. All right, so this is how and when to cite. I'm going to post this video and I'm going to send out to most of you this document as well, so you'll have it to look at so that you can see the examples of citation. But it is mandatory from this point out that you do cite in your discussion posts, your peer responses, and in everything you submit to me, because again, this is just one of those things that in the academic world we have to do. We have to give credit to people who share information with us, from whence we get information. We have to acknowledge that this is work that someone else did in bringing it to us. All right, if you have any questions at this point, ask me. But I will tell you from this point out, if you do not use internal citation, it is an automatic 0 because it's considered to be plagiarism. It's basically you stating, even if you don't intend to, that you came up with all this information on your own. And of course, we didn't. We read it in the textbook, we read it in other places, we watch it in videos, we see it in all kinds of places. So you must cite when you use information that you read somewhere else. And you must cite, even if you know something, you must cite it if it is not considered to be common knowledge. Right, again, if you have any questions, please email me. My email address is right here. It is pretty much everywhere in the course itself. I look forward to hearing from you, and I understand that this can be confusing, so better to err on the side of caution than it is not to do it all. So if you have questions, like I said, let me know.